We're building it so big, so powerful, so strong, stronger than we've ever been. And hopefully, we'll never have to use it. And as the golfers can tell you, the stronger we get, the less likely it is that we will have to use it. But we'll be at a point the likes of which we've never been as a power. And again, hopefully never having to use that incredible equipment that is built right here, best in the world, in the USA. We also gave our great warriors their largest pay raise in 8 years. So they got a pay raise, and it was about time. They've been waiting for a long time. And I'm proud that under my administration, we've passed the largest VA reforms in half a century. I signed into law just recently the VA accountability legislation. And just so you understand, accountability, you couldn't fire anybody in the VA. They could be sadists. They could be late. They could be bad. They could have lots of problems. They could talk back to you. You couldn't do a thing. For 40 years, they've been trying to get it passed. And we got it passed. It's called VA accountability. And as I've said before, we now look at the person that violates our great veterans. And we say, Jim, get the hell out of here. You're fired. And we can do it. Now we can do it. You couldn't do anything. If they're no good, and if they're good, we reward. We have a lot of great people. As promised, we opened the White House VA hotline and have instituted new transparency on wait times and quality of care. We are processing veteran claims more quickly than ever before. We're expanding health care so that our great veterans can get care anywhere and at any time. And maybe most importantly, I don't know, accountability is important, but this is another one. I used to be very proud of myself when I'd be on the campaign trail and I'd say, you know, why don't they just pay a doctor to take care? Because, as you know, sometimes veterans will stand on line for days and days, for weeks. Can you imagine Phil Mickelson going to the doctor and they'll say, good, he should be there in about 12 days. 12 days! That's not acceptable, Phil, right? It's not acceptable. So what we're doing is now, if there's a wait, if there's a problem, you're going to a doctor that might be right across the street. You're going to get taken care of immediately. People would wait so long. You'd wait weeks. You'd stand on a line. You'd literally come back day after day. So now we have what's called VA Choice. And I used to say, why don't they do that? I didn't know anything. I thought I was totally brilliant. I thought this was the greatest idea. Then I went to tell people about it. They said, yeah, we've been trying to get that passed for years. So I was very good at getting it passed because we got it passed 3 weeks ago. So now you have VA Choice, where if you have to wait, you go to a doctor, we pay the doctor. So it's great. Now we're very proud of that. And we're very proud of what's happening at the VA. In order to maintain our security as a nation, we understand that we must have economic strength as well. And nobody believes it. If I would have said it, they would have said, what a horrible thing to say, what an exaggeration. The fake news, they're all back there. They're all back there. If I would have shot a 75, they'd say, there's no way he could do it. There's no way. They might be right about that, actually. But they are back there. They would have said, there's no way. 3.4 million new jobs since Election Day. They would have said, no way. They would have said, and a lot of people would have said. Unemployment claims are at the lowest point in 44 years. That means people are working again. African American unemployment is in the lowest it's ever been. The history of our country, it's at the lowest in the history of our country. Remember, I used to say, what do you have to lose? Vote for Trump. What do you have to lose? Hispanic American unemployment, the lowest in the history of our country. By the way, women, I was saying 2 weeks ago, 21 years. Now I'm saying 66 years. I think within 2 weeks I'll be saying the lowest in history, the lowest unemployment in 66 years. Last year in West Virginia, per capita personal income grew more than 40% faster than the national average. Coal experts, remember I said coal, clean coal. Jim, clean coal, right? We always say clean coal, and what they can do now is incredible with coal. Clean coal exports skyrocketed by more than 60% nationwide. And I'm so proud of that. When we came here, I met with the miners. And I talked to the miners, and I talked to them about different way of life. They didn't want to hear about it. They love digging coal. That's what they like. They love their grandfathers, their fathers, their families. And coal is coming back. And it's also coming back for another reason, national security. And your governor knows very well, and your senator knows very well what that means. With coal, you know, you bomb a pipeline, that's the end of the pipeline. With coal, that stuff is indestructible. You can move it around on a truck. You can dump it at the plant. You can do whatever the hell. You can rain on top of it for a long time, right, Jim? Can rain like crazy. You can do whatever you want. Snow, sleet, wind. You just dump it, it's there. You hit those pipelines, they're gone, and that's the end of it. You're saying, man, we better go out and start cutting some lumber. So for national security purposes, I don't think people talk about it enough. Coal. America is winning again because we're finally putting America first. We're putting our country first. Tomorrow we commemorate 242 years since our forefathers adopted the Declaration of Independence. In their quest to become a sovereign nation, they knew they would have to defeat the most powerful military on land or on sea. They knew that. They knew that as they met, thousands upon thousands of British troops were disembarking outside of New York City, preparing to crush the revolution. They were going to crush it quickly. They weren't even actually taking it seriously. These patriots knew that their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor were on the line. They risked it all for the promise of more of a just and better future. They wanted this great future in this incredible land. They made the same brave choice as countless others who followed in the generations after them, the choice to stand strong for their families, their principles, their pride, and their God-given rights. Every time we see an American in uniform, anytime we have the chance to shake the hand of a veteran, and whenever we hear the stories of our warriors, we are reminded how truly blessed we are to be American and to live in this land of our great heroes, you, our great heroes. This 4th of July, let us pledge to renew the bonds of love and loyalty that unite us together as Americans. Let us pledge to expand the blessings of liberty, prosperity, and justice to all of our citizens. And let us always remember that we are one people and one nation, saluting one great American flag. I want to thank you to every one of these incredible athletes that are here today. These are PGA players. These are unbelievably talented people. They're talented in their mind and in their body. Their muscles are strong, but their mind has to be stronger. It's tough. And these are tough people. These are incredible people. So I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. It's an honor for me, especially as a golfer. It's an honor for me. I want to thank Big Jim Justice. Stand up, Big Jim. Come on. He's about 6'10", and he weighs about, I'm not going to say 450. I won't do that to you, Jim. But he's a big man, and he's done a great job. Do you know that West Virginia is second in the nation in the percentage increase of GDP? Think of what that means. And Jim just said, before we met Trump, that number was not good. Pretty close to last, right? And combinations of a lot of good people with Shelley and you and us. But now think of that. Texas was first. Texas, doing a great job. Great governor there, too. But Texas was first. West Virginia was second. Percentage increase of GDP. That's an incredible accomplishment in a short period of time. Incredible. I want to thank everyone at the Greenbrier for making this tournament a beautiful tribute to our military. And thanks again to all of the veterans here tonight and all across America. We love you, we thank you, and we will never, ever forget you. God bless our veterans. God bless America. And happy Independence Day to all. Thank you very much. This is a great honor. Thank you. Thank you.
This is a Fox News alert. President Trump wrapping up remarks at the Salute to Service charity dinner at the Greenbrier in West Virginia, thanking our servicemen and women for all that they have done for our country. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sandra Smith in for Martha MacCallum tonight, and this is the story. The president just weighing in on the news of the moment on immigration, saying we need tough laws, we need fair laws, we respect ICE, we want border security. Also gave us an update there at the top of his speech on his Supreme Court pick. He said we hit a home run with Justice Gorsuch. We're going to hit a home run here. As you all know, he's expected to make his announcement on his pick on Monday, less than a week from today. And he touted the economy, saying we are winning again. And a salute to the servicemen and women at the dinner in West Virginia. He is expected to now go shake hands and say hello to the folks there. About 1,000 gathered in that room in West Virginia. And here now with reaction, he's been standing by for us. Mark Thiessen is an American Enterprise Institute scholar. Charlie Hurt, a political columnist for the Washington Times. Both are Fox News contributors. You both listened on there. Mark, your thoughts on the president's words tonight?
I thought it was a great speech, and the other thing that he did tonight, which was terrific, is he touted his defense investments. He stood there in front of that crowd to cheers and said, we're spending more on our military than any time in the history of this country. I mean, number one, God bless America, that's a message that resonates with the American people. And two, can you imagine, he's heading off to the NATO summit in a few days, heading off to Europe. Can you imagine any European leader giving a speech like that, standing in front of their citizens and saying, I have spent more on defense than any leader of my country ever? It wouldn't happen. And so he's got to deliver a really tough message at NATO, saying you guys got to do what we're doing, maybe not as much as what we're doing, but you guys got to start coughing up the money that you promised you would spend on your own defense, because you're free riders in this NATO alliance that we both love.
And here he is, Charlie, saying all of this on the eve of our Independence Day, days before he is expected to travel internationally, meeting with our NATO allies in Brussels. And he just said, freedom is not free. Yeah. And as we all know, he just sent a letter to world leaders saying, pay your fair share.
Yeah, and of course, the most important part of all of it is that he wants all of this strength so that we don't ever have to use it, which of course is the vital key to I think his success on this point. But what a great showman. It's always fun to see these things. Of course, he didn't miss the opportunity to sort of tease out his Supreme Court nominee that he's going to pick on Monday or announce on Monday. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, he also used the opportunity to tout the economy, which is a good thing to do, by pointing out that West Virginia is ranked second in percentage increase in GDP, which usually West Virginia is ranked elsewhere on those sorts of scales. So that was a good thing as well. But he's clearly enjoying he's enjoying sort of being in campaign mode.
Certainly in that room, he was speaking there at the end and the beginning. Governor Jim Justice, the governor of West Virginia, Senator Shelley Moore Capito, and the Attorney General Patrick Morrisey in the room, and a group of golfers, by the way. He used the opportunity to tout his golf game and give a shout out to Lefty. Phil Mickelson was in the room, Bubba Watson as well.
And he didn't say how much Jim Justice weighs, which was I thought was very, very considerate.
Very thoughtful of him.
Stay tuned for that. Hey, I want to bring in David Tafuri as well. He's been standing by. He was a foreign policy advisor to President Obama. David, jump into the conversation here. Your thoughts?
Well, I think this was a very interesting speech. He didn't talk much about his upcoming visit to the UK and to Europe, but we're looking ahead to that visit, and that's going to be very interesting. When the US and the UK meet, it's always important to close allies with shared interests, but our relationship with some of our allies is frayed right now, and same with the UK. So perhaps we can find some commonality in our situation. I hope that President Trump uses this visit with Theresa May to come up with some objectives for the NATO meeting. I hope that President Trump will be more clear about his support for NATO. He can complain about some of the NATO countries not doing more to build up their own defenses, but he also needs to recite how important that shared security alliance is for the security of the U.S. and for Europe. We cannot do many things in foreign policy, and we cannot do many things with respect to our military if we don't have allies behind us. So he needs to pump up NATO, even as he tries to get the countries to spend more.
Here's the problem with that, is that, so I worked for Donald Rumsfeld in the Pentagon and George W. Bush and wrote countless speeches for both of them saying how important it is that the NATO allies pay their 2% of GDP. President Obama gave the same speeches. Nothing happened. And so when you go out there, when there are no consequences, when there's no threat, that he's very smart to withhold this full-throated support for NATO, because it was only when he was questioning whether or not he was going to meet the Article 5 commitment that they kicked in $12 billion more when he came into office. And doing that, in pushing them to spend more, he's actually showing the importance of the NATO alliance. You know, he doesn't run around yelling at the United Nations. We just withdrew from the UN Human Rights Council, and nobody cared because the UN is irrelevant. NATO is not irrelevant.
But Charlie, you're already seeing the pushback
because they're important.
You're already seeing the pushback, Charlie, from NATO members. I mean, the president's put his warning out there. He's written the letters. What happens if they don't respond?
He's written the letters, and of course this didn't get as much notice as I thought it should. In a speech in Fargo, I think it was last week, he said that the era of global freeloading is over. And he was talking about not just trade and immigration and things like that, but obviously he was also talking about NATO. But I think Mark is right. It does, it's some of the language he uses and some of the things that he says. It is kind of a shock to the system. It's no wonder that Europe is just kind of aghast at his tone on a lot of this stuff. But it's that shock to the system that I think has probably brought more progress on issues like this than anything else that we've ever seen.
David, jump back in here.
Well, there's been very little progress, to be honest. I think President Trump is right to push the countries to pay more for their defense. However, they suffer as much on their own for not having a strong defense. We have a strong defense. We're the leader of the free world. We need to continue to be the leader of the free world. We cannot lead if we are not also leading NATO, which is so important. And we need to have these countries on board with us. So a more gentle approach, in my view, is appropriate, because we want these countries on board when we have to do interventions, when we have to fight terrorism, as we are doing in Syria and Iraq and other places.
Can you give me 5 seconds and we'll finish on you?
He is leading NATO because he's forcing them to spend more money, which is good for all of the NATO alliance.
But he's threatening to pull out of NATO.
No, he's not. No, he's not. That's
all right,
not
guys,
true.
we've got to leave it there. Thank you. We've got the breaking news and the president's speech. It kind of compressed our time there. Thanks to all three of you gentlemen. Coming up, we are live at the cave where rescuers are desperately trying to save those 12 boys and their soccer coach, trapped a mile underground. Plus, disgraced FBI agent Peter Strzok, who promised to come clean with America over those anti-Trump text messages, now says, never mind, not without a subpoena. Jonathan Turley is here on that next.
The FBI is instructing Mr. Strzok not to answer many, many questions. At this point, I can't get into the details, but it is a very serious concern.
The Trump-bashing FBI agent who promised to come clean with the American people now says he does not want to talk. Peter Strzok, infamous for sending a series of text messages to his lover, Lisa Page, who was supposed to testify before Congress next week. But then he dropped this bombshell today, right before the holiday. Quote, given that the committee has proven it is playing political games, it no longer makes sense for us to keep playing along. In response, the committee issued a subpoena demanding he show up or be locked up. Jonathan Turley, constitutional law attorney and constitutional professor at George Washington University. Professor Turley, thank you for your time tonight. So, as we all recall, Strzok said, I'll be there. I will volunteer to testify and answer questions before Congress. And now they have to subpoena him. What changed?
Well, I think a lot of people are confused, including myself. I actually agreed with Strzok's attorney when he objected that his client had been put through this long closed session, and then all these people are describing how he appeared and what he said. I do think that's sort of unfair. I've never liked that. And so he asked for that transcript to be made public, and I agreed that really should be the way it is done. I mean, it's in fairness to him. But then he also said he wanted to testify publicly, and that also made a lot of sense. This doesn't. I mean, to suddenly declare that, they're not playing by the rules, I'm not too sure what those rules are. They had a closed session. He asked for a public session. They want a public session. And now he's saying he won't do it. And part of the problem is that he is a public employee. It's true he was shown the door at Department of Justice, but he is still an employee of the federal government. An oversight committee is seeking his information on a matter of great national importance. I find it really quite troubling that an FBI agent, let alone someone with his seniority, would refuse that type of testimony.
So what do you think him showing up, what does this hinge on, really? I mean, that was 11 hours behind closed doors that he answered questions, but according to some members of Congress, he didn't really answer a lot of the questions that they had. But he and his lawyers say turn over the transcript from that day, from those 11 hours. If they do that, does he then show up?
Well, it doesn't sound like it. It sounds like this is a calculated move to force a subpoena. But the only reason you do that is in the hope that it could end up being elevated to some type of immunity grant, which would be, in my view, quite reckless by the committee. What is curious about that 11-hour session is that supposedly he refused to answer many questions that go to the heart of the IG investigation. I'm not even sure what the grounds were for him to refuse those questions, but there's every reason in the world to expect all the questions to be answered from this individual. There are maybe some privilege issues that have to be dealt with, but at this point, with so much water under the bridge, it is hard to imagine many relevant questions where he would continue to refuse to answer. The idea of his appearance was that we would finally get a full account. He said that he's been treated unfairly. Maybe he has, but the way to correct the record is to make a record. Testify publicly, and we can see how you're being treated. And yes, the committee should release that transcript, in my view, in fairness to him as well.
So ultimately, do you think we will see him publicly testify in that chair before members of Congress on Tuesday next week?
Well, he's got to be careful about bearding this lion. If he now has a subpoena with his name on it, unless he wants a citation of contempt to follow, he's going to have to appear. Now, he can appear and say that he won't testify on the grounds that it might incriminate him, but that becomes problematic because he just testified for 11 hours. So I don't think he's in a good position, and I think he needs to appear.
Interesting stuff. We will see where all of this goes. Professor Turley, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, still to come, the controversial plan that would force teachers in one state to out transgender students to their parents. Plus, a new danger as Democratic anger with President Trump and his supporters now escalates from protests to actual violence. David Webb and Mo Elathi here to debate after the break.
I just wanted to urge you to resign because of what you're doing to the environment in our country. This is my son. He loves animals. He loves clean air. He loves clean water.
The fireworks coming early this week as anger among Democrats escalates overnight. From shouting at EPA Secretary Scott Pruitt at a D.C. restaurant to vandalizing Nebraska's Republican Party headquarters. Trace Gallagher has the backstory from our West Coast newsroom. Trace?
Hey, Sandra, Kristen Mink is a 6th grade teacher just outside of D.C., and she fully acknowledges that in recent days she watched as Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen got shouted down at a D.C. restaurant. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders got kicked out of a D.C. restaurant, and Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters said this. Watch.
If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them.
So when Kristen Mink, along with her husband and 2-year-old son, saw EPA Chief Scott Pruitt having lunch yesterday, she felt obligated to confront him. Watch.
This is my son. He loves animals. He loves clean air. He loves clean water. We deserve to have somebody at the EPA who actually does protect our environment, somebody who believes in climate change and takes it seriously for the benefit of all of us, including our children. So I would urge you to resign before your scandals push you out.
Secretary Pruitt apparently looked her directly in the eye but did not respond. And when Mrs. Mink walked back to her table, Pruitt got up and walked out of the restaurant. By posting her video on social media, Mink is hoping to encourage others to call out public officials, presumably Republican public officials. But in Lincoln, Nebraska, words apparently were not sufficient, so somebody used bricks and spray paint to convey their message, vandalizing the state headquarters of the Nebraska Republican Party, shattering a window and leaving graffiti messages that read, "Abolish ICE," a recent rallying cry of the left. Lincoln police are now scouring surveillance video from nearby businesses, trying to find the vandals, and the head of the state GOP says the resistance on the left has emboldened people to act out, and experts on both sides of the aisle worry that if it's okay to shame and harass public officials, how long before average citizens are also fair game? Sandra.
Trace, thank you. Here with more, David Webb is a Sirius XM Patriot host. Mo Alithi is the founding executive director of Georgetown University's Institute of Politics and Public Service. I'll start with you first. Has this gone too far?
Look, I think we've been down a dangerous trajectory for quite some time now. Let me begin by saying there's absolutely no room for vandalism and violence when it comes to public discourse. That was true in what happened in Omaha. It was also true when this happened in 2010 and 2011. During the midst of the healthcare reform fight, when Democratic Party headquarters in local communities around the country were also vandalized with bricks, with messages taped to them being thrown through those windows. That was wrong then, and this is wrong now. And so I do worry that there is a...
Follow her from restaurant to restaurant. That's harassment and bullying. Kirstjen Nielsen, that's harassment and bullying. When you see it, there's a difference in the scope. Passion should never carry over to violence.
So you both agree it's gone too far, but Mo, are you seeing leaders of your party push back enough on this? Chuck Schumer spoke out, said he strongly disagrees with Waters' call for harassing members of Trump's team. Do we need to hear more?
I think a vast majority of Democratic leaders have pushed back on that.
Should they do so more?
They're doing it fairly aggressively, I think. And what bothers me is when people try to politicize this and say one side is more guilty than the other.
Well, one side is more guilty than the other, Mo, when it comes to the police report.
Let Mo make his point.
Let me finish my point.
There was an attempted assassination of congressmen at a baseball game by a leftist Bernie Sanders supporter. Let's not try to claim one over the other.
Let me finish my point, please. Okay, members of Congress on both sides are oftentimes harassed. Members of Congress I know received death threats during the health care reform fight.
Okay, so you've seen this before. What have we learned? How are we addressing this? How are we going to get through this?
Well, let's stop.
David, what about
first? Let me just answer that question real quick, and then I'll let David make his point. Let's stop pointing fingers and saying this is a problem on the left.
Well, I'm not saying it's a problem on the left.
What you're doing is you're turning people.
I'm not. Let's stop with the false equivocation on scope. I'm not pointing fingers, but I am reporting accurately.
When you both talk, we can't hear you.
Mo,
I'm sorry. Go.
Mo, I am reporting accurately on the level of violence by the numbers and where it comes from. And we have to be fair about that. I'm not pointing one or the other. I could cite Barack Obama saying things. I could cite Donald Trump saying things. I can cite congressmen saying things. But there were 576 arrests at the Capitol last week. And those were not just peaceful protesters.
We're talking about lack of civility in politics. And David,
the civility's gone.
You can't ignore the fact that the left wants to say that this starts with the leader in the White House right now. Do you want the president to say something further to stem
yes, I
the
do.
lack of civility
Yes, I
in
do.
politics?
I want any president of the United States to tamp down on that. But also we have to realize that this has been done before. Mo's right about that. For over a decade, it has gone down that path, because I could cite Obama doing the same thing time and time again. And this is where we are.
Mo, I've got a few seconds left. Last word to you.
I would like the president to stop the kind of rhetoric he uses at his rallies that have fired people up in a very negative way, and let him join the rest of us in these calls.
Well, where was your outrage during Obama,
the
Mo?
fight.
All right, we've got to.
Where was your outrage during Obama and his statements?
Right,
it was not
existent. This is a debate that's happening across the country right now. Thanks to both of you for being here tonight. Mo, David, thank you. Coming up, the dramatic effort to rescue those teenage soccer team that's been trapped a mile underground. A caving expert joins us to explain the daring mission to get them out safely. Plus, controversy in the classroom, lawmakers proposing a bill that would force teachers to tell parents if they believe their children are transgender. We'll talk to a teacher and a mother about all the issues that this could cause next. Teachers in Ohio may soon have to out any transgender students to their parents. A newly proposed bill in the Ohio House, sponsored by 2 Ohio Republicans, would force teachers to immediately notify parents if they see any signs of gender dysphoria. Critics say the bill could endanger children's lives, but supporters say this will allow the child to get access to resources and treatment. Here now is Kathy Barnett, an adjunct professor and mother of 2 who homeschools her children, also a veteran as well. Thank you for your service.
Thank you for having me.
So please do, for those who this is brand new, they're hearing about this for the first time. Right. What does this involve between the teacher, the school, and the student and the parent? How does this all happen?
Okay, well, let's start off from the beginning. Actually, this particular bill says nothing about the teacher playing gender cop and outing transgender students. Mm-hmm. Instead, it reaffirms the role of the parent to parent their children according to the way that they see fit, which is a novel idea, right? It should be a foregone conclusion that I, as a parent, know my child best, and I'm the first and last authority on what should happen with my children. So this is what this bill does. It recognizes parental rights, and it bars the state and all of their entities from infringing or impeding upon my right to parent my child the way that I see fit. So, in fact, if a student, for example, goes to a teacher and says, I know my name is Jim, but I want you to call me Mary, the teacher has an obligation to immediately notify the parents and to wait to receive written permission before the teacher goes ahead and start offering gender dysphoria literature and conversations and hormone treatment opportunities.
So then it's the option of the parent then to follow up with any treatment for their child that they may want to seek. They can say no if they want to.
They can say no if they want to. Go figure that, right? But we have a number of people, whether we're talking about the LGBT community or whether we're talking about even the Ohio school union, who are against this particular bill because they believe that the teacher, in fact, knows more about my child than I do. But I find it very subjective, right? Because how would an English teacher be able to look at my child and diagnose him or her as having gender dysphoria? What is the rubric that this English teacher is going to use to say, okay, this is, you're not showing characteristics that's manly enough, so therefore you must be suffering from gender dysphoria. Allow me to now start moving you in a particular path.
What so far is the feedback on this? I mean, how do parents in general, how are they reacting to the idea of this?
Yeah, on my way and coming here, I started just mentioning this to every parent that I saw, and they all said the exact same thing. the role of the teacher is to provide understanding of reading, writing, and arithmetic. And once they get that job down pat, then maybe we can entertain them parenting our children.
Teach our students first.
But in Ohio, they actually rank number 36. So I say, get your first job down pat before you start trying to usurp my role as a parent.
Interesting. Some who support the bill, the president of the Citizens for Community Values organization in Ohio, says he wants this bill to pass because it prevents public schools from intentionally keeping parents in the dark about a child's struggle with gender dysphoria. Do some parents feel that they are left in the dark? Teachers, the schools, somebody sees something, they hear something from the student that never gets sent home.
We see this all the time, right? I mean, I found out that they were teaching my 5-year-old about homosexuality, and she was 5 years old in kindergarten. Why are you introducing this particular subject? But because the state is all too willing to usurp the role of parents. And this is what this bill actually does. It pushes against the assault on the role of the parent in their own child's life.
Fascinating. A lot of parents listening on at that. The bill's expected to go before the state's legislature in the fall.
Yes.
We will see what happens next with that. Kathy, thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see you tonight. Well, up next, we will take you live to the cave where the desperate effort to rescue those 12 boys and their soccer coach trapped deep underground is growing more urgent at this hour. How those boys are holding up and why experts say the situation is likely to get worse. We'll have that for you next.
There's not only like physiological considerations, but probably psychological considerations.
You're looking live at Chiang Rai, Thailand. It's just before 7 a.m. there, and the world is watching as those rescuers weigh all sorts of options for getting those 12 young boys and their soccer coach trapped in a cave almost a mile below the ground to safety, creating an imminent threat right now is the forecast of more rain and flooding. Experts say to escape, the boys could swim out or be taught to scuba dive, but even elite Navy divers are finding it difficult to navigate those waters. The other option, sit tight until the end of Thailand's rainy season, which is 4 months from now. Gary Schindel is a caving specialist and president of the National Speleological Society, a group whose focus is the exploration and study of caves. Gary, thank you for your time tonight. First, can you give an update as to the threat that these boys and that coach face at this moment?
Well, they really only have two options, it seems. The first one is trying to bring them out through scuba diving, and it's an incredibly technical and very, very dangerous activity. They have basically the best cave divers in the world, and I'm sure it's been difficult for them with the currents and also the tight restrictions and that. So bringing some kids out who have not had any cave diving or even swimming experience, there's some question about that, would be very, very difficult and fairly dangerous. The other alternative is to wait out the monsoons, but part of the problem is you don't know how severe they are and how high the cave will flood. So there's always a possibility that water could rise and actually flood the passage they're in. So no easy decisions there. It appears that the Thai government has done an incredible job in basically trying to coordinate an incredibly difficult rescue.
Gary, a mile underground, how did they get there?
Well, it's a horizontal cave, so you walk in the entrance, but the hill rises above the cave, and so the estimates are they're about 1,000 meters, 3,000 foot deep from the top of the mountain, which makes drilling into the cave extremely difficult and very impractical to get a drill rig up there. It would take a long time to drill into the cave like that.
Gary, we know that we've got members of our armed forces there trying to help out. You've laid out a couple options for us. Timing is obviously going to be key here. What are we hearing about how these boys and their coach are doing right now?
Well, I think that just making contact with the cave divers has probably lifted their spirits. From what I saw with some of the video feed, that it looked like they're in pretty good shape. I'm sure they're excited to be contacted. They now have light and food, and they're having some medical care. So that's very, very positive. But I'm sure the prospects of staying in the cave for 4 months would be pretty daunting.
Obviously, it was incredibly difficult for them to even reach them in the first place. How did they go about finding them?
Well, you know, there was a map of the cave, but again, these divers, cave divers, have specialty training and specialty equipment, and they are very methodical in having to swim in basically in water that I'm sure is basically silt laden and with very little, if no, visibility. Plus, there's you know, some swift currents that they probably had to deal with. And I also understand there was one place where they had a constriction where they actually had to take off their gear, and that is some of the most technical diving that you can do. It's extremely dangerous, requires, like I say, a great deal of training and experience, and a very, very cool head.
Gary, clearly this is a situation that is developing by the minute, by the hour. We're watching this, desperate to get these boys and that man free. As far as managing an operation like this, what does that take? Just a few seconds left.
Well, yeah, it's difficult. They have tried all their options. They've tried to find another entrance. They have tried to pump water out of the cave. Yep.
Yeah.
And,
I'm sorry, I'm putting you on a time constraint and asking you about this incredibly large operation. I realize